So, welcome to the Too Much to Say podcast, episode 9, The Value of Truth, and the episode where Sam mutes Ross for basically 30 minutes and the entire weekly random, where we covered a bunch of good stuff. North Korea, Trump getting shown up by Kim Jong-un, Trump's Memorial Day tweet, another school shooting, but you'll never hear any of it. Because I muted him, and then I deleted it, and I'm about to fast forward all the way to the value of truth discussion. So, sorry. Oh my goodness. I just realized something horrible. You're muted. You are no longer muted.
Well, hey everybody. Good to be with you.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe I've muted.
Okay, I didn't say anything important at all.
He wasn't talking for the last 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I realized I muted you because I didn't want to have any background noise from anything. I didn't mute you specifically. I muted my desktop on OBS. And you come through the desktop.
Well,
Welcome, Ross. Welcome, Ross, to the Too Much to Say podcast.
Very good to be here. I clearly had way too much to say that it couldn't even be transmitted.
Oh my goodness.
Well, that's all right.
Yeah, probably just gonna have to edit that whole part out. So don't worry about that.
It was a good conversation in any case. I enjoyed it, and it's a shame nobody else was privy to that delightful banter.
Oh God, that's bad. That's holy shit.
We'll follow a protocol next time. We'll set up a checklist.
Oh my God, that.
It's all good. Well, on a more somber note than that, I guess I'll go ahead and introduce this next little piece of news here. So most of you have probably already heard about the shooting that happened in Noblesville, Indiana, on I think it was Thursday. It was on early Friday morning. Mm-hmm. So a 12 or 13-year-old. There's not a lot of details about the suspect at this point. The suspect is in custody, but it was a 7th grader, 12 or 13 years old, who asked to leave class, and when he came back, he was toting 2 handguns and proceeded to open fire on the classroom, injuring one 13-year-old female student. And in the commotion, we have a teacher here, Jason Seaman, 7th grade teacher here, who, I mean, honestly, there's no other way to say it, but was a complete hero, and threw himself basically into the line of fire and to try to tackle this student and pry the gun out from his hand. Was shot 3 times in the process. Both Seaman and the 13-year-old girl student, I think, they're stable as far as we know. They were immediately hospitalized after the event, but they were able to. He was able to apprehend the suspect. Police came in, took care of the situation. Kids were evacuated to the high school. Parents picked them up, and fortunately, no one was killed. But it's still just a tragic situation. And honestly, Sam, I mean, to me, the most tragic thing about this is it just feels like, I mean, how young are they going to get? You know, when a 12 or a 13-year-old kid is coming in with a gun with the intent to kill. I just don't understand. I mean, no shooting, no public shooting that has happened in the last couple of years has made sense in my brain. But just the younger it gets, the more I just am so baffled. I don't even know how to really process that.
Yeah, I agree. But what's crazy about not just I'll give you the age, but also it feels like it's nonstop. At least recently, that's 2 back-to-back weeks. We had Santa Fe the week before. We have Noblesville Middle School, and then how long ago was Parkland?
Right.
Maybe that was a month ago or so.
A few months ago.
Yeah, a couple months ago.
But in any case, I mean.
But it's just the volume. we shouldn't be talking about school shootings with the word volume. The quantity. We shouldn't. It should be a national tragedy, and we talk about it for 5 years because it's been 5 years since the last one, or 10 years, or
We still remember that fateful day, you know.
I mean, I know that Columbine has its kind of it's etched in history. It seems like for me and my at least in my mind is the first one for me.
Yeah.
Um, but
I think it was certainly the first of that magnitude. I think that's.
But it's not stopping.
No.
I mean,
yeah, it's not slowing down. It's not getting any better.
I just
and I don't know. You could make a case for it saying it's getting worse. It's getting more frequent.
I mean, this one obviously had 0 casualties, which is a huge improvement.
Thankfully.
I mean,
but that's not because anything was improved. It's just because he missed his shot. I mean,
and because we had a heroic teacher.
Yep. Yes.
Jason,
of course, Jason Seaman. Yeah,
Jason Seaman. I mean, shout out. I mean, everything to him. Like
that's really going to bat
the fast acting. He saw the kid was acting weird, and then the kid was kind of fiddling with something in his pocket. He got 4 to 6 shots off, and the teacher was on him, and the teacher absorbed 3 of those, and still wrestled the gun from his hand, like that. I mean, that's a hero. I hope he gets a statue at this middle school.
Yeah.
Like,
or at the very least, a very handsome bonus.
Well, I want a statue though. I want to honor his memory.
A library named after him.
Like,
he saved their lives. That's all there is to it. And the police chief said the same thing. They're convinced basically that there would have been casualties had it not been for this teacher. So, yeah, that's heroism at its finest. Heroism. But
yeah, like I said, I want a statue and a bonus for him. I want
his family. So yeah, that's anyway. It's tragic. Good for him, but it's a tragic situation, and we could get into a whole nother discussion about that. There's not really much to say about it today besides just. Hopefully there's not another one next week, I guess.
And write your congressman. Like, something needs to be done. If any silver lining can be dragged from this horrible situation, is that gun violence and school violence will be kept in the minds. As long as we don't allow this to become normal, it can at least stay in the conversation until we fix it. It cannot become normal. We need to keep talking about it. Hopefully we don't need to keep having these incidents to keep talking about it. But until we change things, I know that there's already been some change in Parkland. I know that they've enacted some things, not in Parkland specifically, but in Florida specifically, actually, in the whole entire state. But we need national reform for guns, but also mental health. And we need to move towards some changes, pure and simple. And until that happens, we need to keep talking about it.
And not take this helpless position of, well, gun violence is just a fact of life. And all we can do really is just defend ourselves. Put guns on teachers.
We need to give teachers guns. That's how we're going to solve gun violence.
That problem. Yay. Just with more gun violence. Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that one, but let's on a much happier note. You want to give our shower thought of the week?
It's pretty fantastic.
A good one.
It's one of the better ones, I think. I saw this one and I was rather pleased. This comes from user Tisovix. That seems like a good pronunciation. User Tisovix. Reading a book under a tree seems nice to us, but for a tree, it's taunting them with the shredded flesh of their family.
Do you ever think about that?
This goes to your wife specifically. Yeah. She's rather heartless. She's
avid reader.
rather heartless,
It's
reading
just like,
books
have some
under trees.
consideration, you know? Right.
Trees have feelings too. Okay.
Did you ever think about that? No, of course you didn't.
No, because you're only thinking about the
Yourself.
stories. The stories, okay?
All right. Well, we've got a hearty topic today. This one, I think we're going to be asking a lot more questions than we're going to be answering in today's conversation, but that's okay. Hopefully, bringing up some interesting food for thought, and
Questions are
trying
good.
to, yeah, questions are good, and questions can help us kind of reshape some of our own ideas and help us kind of hone in on ideas, refine ideas that we didn't.
And luckily, I don't have you muted for this.
We assume.
No, I can see the audio.
So, and if he just gets upset with me at some point, then he'll just mute me again. So.
Shh.
All
Don't
right.
tell anybody.
Bastard. All right. Let's. So today we want to talk about the value of truth. Now, this is a huge topic. This is a huge conversation. I basically what spurred this whole conversation is, we live in a kind of a strange interim right now in the United States history. Some people call it the era of post-truth. This idea that truth is becoming devalued today, that it is no longer as important whether or not something is true. It only matters whether or not it is convenient, perhaps, or acceptable, or easy to swallow, or fits an agenda. Right? There's all kinds of reasons, but basically the idea that truth serves other masters, and that it's not inherently valuable. And so kind of in our discussion of this, we're kind of want to lay some groundwork here for you to help kind of understand what exactly is truth. How do we understand it? How do we understand what knowledge is, and what kind of responsibilities we have surrounding those things? Before I kind of jump into definitions of truth and knowledge, Sam, do you have anything you want to add about that primer?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of sparked the initial idea for this podcast was this past week, Elon Musk, who we on the Too Much to Say podcast are big fans of in general. I mean, I am, and Tesla and the Boring Company and SpaceX. There we are. I was about to say, have I dropped this one? SpaceX. I mean, I think that he is one of the great innovators of our time. But he came out with an interesting idea, and I don't know how to feel about it. And if there's one thing that Elon Musk is he's a doer. So he came out he basically wants us, the public, to rate journalists, and he would call his site Pravda, which is Russian. What is the Russian? It's the Russian.
It's Russian for collusion.
Russian for collusion, and he actually has already gotten the copyright for Pravda. But there is all sorts of ethical issues with this idea, all sorts of different issues with the idea of being able to rate journalism and journalists. To keep going down this thread, there was another Reddit shower thought that said, "You never fully realize how inept mainstream media is until they cover a topic you know a lot of." And to go one more step, and then we'll get into what the definitions is. The Gell-Mann amnesia effect, which the quote that defines it best is, "I believe everything the media tells me, except for which I have direct personal knowledge, which they always get wrong."
So this goes into basically our interpretation of truth and knowledge, and the biases that we bring to bear on those things. We have, because media is an authority figure in our lives, and as humans we are preconditioned to trust authority figures. we tend to believe the media as long as we don't have greater personal knowledge of the topic. Until the media does talk about something which we know a lot about, and then all of a sudden the media is not so trustworthy, right? And then we are very, very skeptical of their claims, and we think we know better.
But
and so there's two biases happening here. One is the bias of trusting authority on a whim. The other one is also assuming we know a lot more about something just because we know a little bit.
what's really interesting though is that it is basically where the amnesia part of that whole idea comes from is that you could be reading a newspaper and you could have, let's say you were actually at like a bank robbery. You were in the bank when it happened. And you read all the details come out about the bank robbery and you're like, yeah, that's not what happened. But then you move on to the next story and you're back to trusting them again. You just read this whole article where you're like, no, that's not what happened. And then you go to the next story and you're like, oh, sure. That's exactly like there were, over in the Middle East, this battle happened for this reason and blah, blah. This is the politics involved. And you're just like on board. Like, yep, that's what happened. That's why it happened.
It kind of reminds me of, it's kind of Orwellian. It kind of reminds me of Doublethink, if any of you have read 1984. He talks about doublethink as the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them.
I mean, the ability to think that your newspaper would know less about a local event than one happening on the other side of the world is just fascinating.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we're guilty of it here, even on the podcast. I mean, we just went, maybe not the disagreement part. I do try to find good sources. I tried to kind of back up the sources, make sure there are multiple sources reporting the same things, and read kind of different things before we bring them up here. But we just went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different articles just from media sources, and according to all the media sources I could find, these seem pretty accurate. And I try to steer clear of the different news medias that I know that are really biased. Like, I know Fox News is very pro-Trump. MSNBC is very anti-Trump. Like, I try not to use those when I present data because I don't trust them. But still, how accurate is the BBC? How accurate is Bloomberg? I didn't experience the thing that happened. I wasn't in North Korea or in the Korean DMZ when there was the surprise summit. But it was reported. I assume it happened. I believe it. Yeah, I believe it.
And we're going to kind of try to circle around this today and try to find some understanding about when is it acceptable to believe those things, when do we need more information, and what is even the nature of truth in the first place. And I kind of want to look at here at this. There's a couple of definitions of truth, and we're only going to be using one of them primarily for today's purposes. But if you look up truth, you'll find a couple definitions. One of them is the quality, or the definition of it is the quality or state of being true. Basically, the idea there is that if there's some kind of assertion being made, then there's a truth value proposition. So if I say the sky is blue, then that proposition has a truth value. Basically, it's either true or false or indeterminate. In this case, we accept that to be true. The sky is blue. Now, if I make a prediction about the future and say that, Donald Trump is going to trip on the stairs tomorrow, that truth value is indeterminate. We can't determine that. It is neither true nor false. It is indeterminate.
I mean, there's a fair amount of evidence. His weight, the kind of pants that he wears.
Yeah, we can maybe make a prediction. Nonetheless, it is not true nor false. So truth can also be that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. So there's this idea that truth has some kind of correlation with reality. And that's kind of the definition we're going to be looking at the most today, is whether or not something actually adheres to the rules of reality. It's grounded in reality, in the way we actually experience the world. Now, there's another definition here, that truth is a fact or belief that is accepted as true. I'll read that again. A fact or belief that is accepted as true. So it doesn't have so much to do with truth value, has more to do with how it is colloquially interpreted. And we're going to kind of reject this definition for today's purposes because therein lies somewhat of the problem of why we live in an era of post-truth, because people are using that as a definition and thinking of truth as something that is just accepted, even though it's just a belief and we have no knowledge of it.
The idea of truth being relative.
Exactly. So that kind of brings us into the arena of knowledge, which is how do we come to know truth and what counts as actual knowledge of the truth. So kind of philosophers have battled with this question for a long time. Right now, the traditional definition of knowledge is that it is justified true belief. So right there, we're establishing 3 criteria. We're establishing that it must be something that is true. So if I believe something and it's false, then I don't actually have knowledge of that thing. Now, if I believe something, but that belief I have is false, did I just say that one? I did. Yeah. Let's say now there's something that's true, but I don't believe it. Then I don't have any knowledge of it. But let's say I believe something that is also true. So, for example, I make an educated guess here, and I believe that there is a cat in San Francisco named Terrence. Now, that might very well be true, and I might believe that it is true. But if I don't have a justification for believing that it is true, then I don't have knowledge of that thing. I don't know that there is a cat in San Francisco named Terrence, even though there very well might be. So in order to have knowledge, I have to believe something, and that something must be true, and I must be justified in believing it.
Also, Terrence is a horrible name for a cat.
It is, right? So unlikely that it's true, but you never know in San Francisco.
Oh, it's San Francisco.
Yeah. Could be true.
Okay.
So that's going to be the working definition that we use today. Knowledge is justified true belief. Now, justification comes in a number of ways. Justification can come from either a testimony, which is kind of taking the word of a person in an authority position, somebody that has the knowledge or has the experience, and we can take their testimony at their word. Or knowledge can also come from firsthand observation, doing the work ourselves. And therein kind of lies a lot of the trouble of where we get knowledge from the media. Do we take it on word of authority that they know what they're talking about, or do we have to do the firsthand observation ourselves? I don't think that Sam and I, have to go to the DMZ to know for a fact that there was a summit meeting there between North and South Korea's leaders. We can take on good word of authority from the media that did happen. But where do we draw that line?
That justification, I think, is the hardest thing, period. The part of this that gets, something is either true or false. I either believe it or I don't, but whether or not I am justified, I think it's the part of this that plagues philosophers. And ironically enough, I think it plagues the general population as well, just sort of subconsciously. I don't think we realize that it's the justification of all this that bothers us. But I think at the ground root, it is the issue with the fake news. Like, the problem with the fake news isn't that it's fake. There's plenty of fake stuff out there. Every Marvel movie you've ever seen is fake. Every 90% of movies you watch, it's completely BS. All the books you read, we enjoy it. It's great because we have zero justification that it's real. But when it comes to this fake news, that the justification portion is what's really the issue here, is that people are using the justification of, an article I saw online, this comment that I saw someone make, this statement by a celebrity. Like, I think the justification is somewhere where we just we need to get a better grasp on it. And I know it's something that plagues philosophers and has for centuries. But
Something like that.
yeah, I mean, as far as I tell, I mean, it's never been a true consensus. But I think we can.
In some ways, I think we could kind of rank justifications, though. I mean, I think we all kind of have an intuitive sense of what kind of justification is a little bit more of merit than others, right? So testimony is good. Firsthand observation is better, right? And that's not to say that testimony is always bad or that we should always mistrust a voice of authority. It's not the case. As humans, we rely on voices of authority in our lives to give meaning and coherence to our existence. But given the ability and the capacity to observe firsthand something, to know it for ourselves, that's always going to be superior. And so, I think this kind of gets into our responsibility, what we are responsible for believing, and what kind of justifications are we responsible for accepting or rejecting when it comes to the media. There's this idea in philosophy that all of us have what's called an epistemic responsibility, or an intellectual responsibility. That is, that we have a responsibility to seek out and propagate things that are true, and we have a responsibility to reject things that don't have a good justification or are false, and a responsibility to embrace that which is true. So if there's something that's true and justified and I don't believe it, I am on the line based on my intellectual responsibility. I should accept that thing and believe it because it is true and it is justified. On the inverse side of that too, if I believe something that is false or is not justified, I have a responsibility to reject that belief because it is not justified or it is not true. Yeah. And this is a self-check that I think people don't do in kind of their day-to-day interactions with the media.
I think, well, that ethical responsibility, I think this is because the other piece is lying, right? So the definition of lying is an intentionally false statement. So that's you. I mean, you could read this Russian bot story, completely believe it, go tell it to somebody else, and you're not technically lying because you're not trying to mislead them or trying to give them a false statement. But what you have done is harm to the community because you have spread a mistruth.
Or at least improperly justified.
Right. Well, no, that's what I'm saying. What you spread was not true in the slightest. And where you failed was your justification. You failed your ethical responsibility to fully vet your source, fully vet the story to the best of your ability. I mean, I think in this day and age of the internet, I mean, like you said, it's better to have a first-hand account, but that's impossible for all the world's events. But we can corroborate stories from multiple sources, and we can also kind of, given the reason test isn't going to give you a perfect results in verifying something, but reason should be part of the equation.
Right. I mean, for me, it's that justification going back to it that kind of brings it all together. And that's like the crux of our responsibility, because I might believe something that is justified. There's good evidence to believe it. And it turns out it's actually false. Right. So I kind of had a false positive there. I was justified in my belief, but it ended up not being true. To me, that's less damning than believing something that is untrue with no justification, or even in some cases believing something that is true but not being justified in your belief of it. Because then you're just taking risks, right? So if I believe something that happens to be true and I'm spreading that information, but I have absolutely no knowledge of it because I don't have any kind of evidence or justification for believing it, then in my opinion, that's more irresponsible than believing something that just happens to not be true. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we get false positives, like you said. We might research, we might compare different sources in the media and find like this corroborates pretty well. This looks this looks pretty justified. I believe it. Come to find out, actually, all that information was kind of incorrect, and we were wrong. I don't think we're on the line there, but at least we've done kind of our civic duty. We've fulfilled our responsibility to keep ourselves in check. But if we believe a bunch of stuff that's true or false, regardless, but we haven't done our due diligence, then I think we're in trouble.
And it's like you said, regardless of whether or not it's true,
Yeah,
you still have that ethical responsibility to verify it. I mean, you do the background research, do the background checks of your sources.
Especially if you're going to spread that information, if you're going to propagate that information, you have to do it on good authority.
I mean, it's really easy to spread something that seems true and that's not true. I mean, something that seems simple and it seems not evident. That's seems very apparent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that like growing up, there have been plenty of things that I've believed that I never questioned, and then when I've gotten older, I'm like, wait, what is? I have to self check. I'm like, wait, why do I believe that? What made me come to this conclusion? Let me go back and verify that. And I'm like, oh wait, that's not true at all. Huh?
Because it wasn't justified.
Yeah, it was
no
just
justification.
like I just probably heard it word of mouth from somebody at some point, and that's why I believed it.
And this is kind of why I feel like there's certain levels of justification as well, right? So you might have had a justified belief because it was from a voice of authority, right? You had a testimony that something was that you should believe something, right? But then come to find out with further inspection and firsthand observation that testimony might not be a good justification.
Yeah, I mean, then you go back and research it, and I'm like, oh wait, well, like I'll tell you one. This is for the longest time I thought there were pink lemons. Because
of pink lemonade.
Yeah, pink lemonade.
That seems like a good justification.
You go to the store, you see pink lemonade, and I was like hyped. I was like, that'd be so cool. Like a pink lemon would be so cool. And then I'm 31. It's probably been at least in the last 12 to 13 years. It may be less than that. I don't know the exact year range here. That I finally went, wait, I've literally never seen a pink lemon. Let me actually look into this to see if there's a pink lemon. And of course, there are no pink lemons. Yet there are purple carrots. And, and like all these other...
That I did not know, actually.
Yeah, carrots actually aren't universally orange.
There you go.
But, yeah, it comes down to that, like, justification of the information.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have any answers today about what constitutes exactly a good justification and doesn't. That's a question that has plagued philosophers for a very long time and continues to do so.
We'll touch on it a little bit, I think, here. When we start, we're going to go into the value of that knowledge, of that truth.
Right.
Because that's essentially the two things we want to cover is the value of truth and the potential cost of truth. Because it's something that kind of we stand on the precipice of these two things and kind of weighing them.
And to kind of clarify a little bit here, value versus cost, those might sound like the same thing, but here we're referring to the value of truth being its inherent value. Without looking at something externally, is there some kind of inherent value that truth has? Versus cost of truth would be, what does it cost? What does the truth cost externally? Are there consequences to the truth or the withholding of it?
Yep. And to go further in the value of truth is we're going to weigh truth against a lie. How much is truth worth? Or like how much is truth worth versus the lie? How much is a big lie worth compared to a big truth? And then
so there's a lot of different moral theories out there about this topic about the value of truth, right? And so some of you may have heard of Immanuel Kant. He was a philosopher who developed a moral theory that he called the categorical imperative, which is basically, in a nutshell, it's kind of do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It's if you universalize any kind of moral or any kind of immoral action, then you find whether or not that holds up. So if my kind of moral imperative is that I'm going to steal a hot dog from a hot dog stand, or steal a hot dog from somebody, and that then if I universalize that, everybody thinks it's their moral, thing to steal hot
Prerogative.
dogs, their prerogative to steal hot dogs, then everybody steals hot dogs and nobody gets hot dogs. It doesn't work. So he would say, we're going to make a categorical statement about morality here and make it an imperative. So, we're going to talk about this in the case of lying, or telling the truth, or versus lying. Kant would say, we have an imperative that we must not lie, because if lying is our moral position, then when universalized, it doesn't withhold the test. It falls apart. And so he felt pretty strongly about this, and he created a moral theory that basically says it is unethical to lie under any circumstances, ever, period, no exceptions.
Yep.
Including a very classic example, which is that, let's say you're hiding Jews under your floorboards during World War II, and the Nazis come knocking on your door. Kant would say, and they ask you if you are harboring Jews. Then Kant would say it is unethical to lie to the Nazis.
Fully realizing what will happen if you tell the truth. It is still,
nonetheless, it is unethical.
Unethical. And I mean, we talked about this in preparation for this, and I agree.
Yeah.
I agree that it is unethical to lie, but you also have
big but here
is that you're then compare how unethical it is compared to what the Nazis were about to do. And obviously there's a gigantic chasm between those two things, and it is obviously far, far, far less unethical to lie to the Nazis than it is to kill people.
Right. And it all has to do with those categorical statements. So if Kant would say, is it wrong to lie to the Nazis? Yes. But if you asked him, should they then lie to the Nazis? He would say, yes. They're both wrong. Both actions of both parties are wrong. You're simply forced into a Hobson's choice. You either tell a lie and commit a moral fault, or you tell the truth and commit another moral fault, which is the Nazis are probably going to kill those people. And then that's your responsibility, right? But the reason he's okay kind of in that situation with lying to the Nazis, even though he would say it is unethical, is because if you take that kind of moral position, lying to Nazis, let's make that a category, lying to Nazis, universalize it. Well, now we have kind of a pretty sweet situation. If everybody lies to the Nazis, we're doing okay. Because the Nazis are terrible people.
That's interesting. I think there are scenarios where you wouldn't want to lie to the Nazis, right?
Perhaps so.
In like if you went to, like, let's say there was a possibility for peace, you wouldn't want to lie to them about, like, we would have loved to have had peace with the Nazis and them to revoke every single thing they ever did. And
well, it's not to say you have to lie to them, right? But that it's okay to lie to them. If we develop a moral theory in which it is permissible to lie to Nazis specifically,
I think it also goes down to a scenario too. The scenario, it's universally okay in that scenario. Like, if you go in, like, anytime you encounter the scenario of Nazis asking where the Jews are, you can lie to the Nazis, and you have almost the moral imperative to lie to the Nazis.
Even though by lying you are committing an ethical fault, but it's just not as bad.
No.
And so, but then this brings up the question, right? And the kind of counter argument to Kantian ethics is utilitarianism, which basically says that the end justifies the means, right? So it doesn't matter what you do as long as the outcome is good. And so Mill was a philosopher who kind of promoted this one, and he would say, for example, let's say we're on a ship, and I want to kill you, and so I throw you off the edge of the ship, but oh crap, it didn't quite work. You're not dead yet. You're just floating there. And so I grab a deck chair from the ship and I throw it down over to try to hit your head, but it just misses. And then the chair's there, and then the person uses that chair to float, and they survive. Well, even though my intent was to kill you, I've just saved your life. So Mill would say, "Yay, that was," because in that case, the outcome is the most important thing. And that's utilitarianism in a nutshell.
What about the person ending up in the water? Where is that outcome included in this idea?
That their life was saved. I saved their life.
I did after endangering their life.
Yes, but it ended up okay.
But they survived. They're worse off. They're pretty worse off because they're in the water. But yeah. but they did survive it.
But I did save their life. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Well, that's the problem with utilitarianism, and that's kind of why I lean towards Kantian ethics, because utilitarianism opens up a whole can of worms when justifications are okay for certain acts, and yeah.
Well, it's what I think is interesting that is if you embrace utilitarianism, I think that if you fully embrace it, you're going to come down to a similar kind of outcome, or similar, not outcome, but decision. Like one of the main, this is where it comes down to the value of truth. How much is truth valuable? So would you lie? Would you bend or break the truth to accomplish a good thing? How big of the good thing, how good does the thing have to be? How much good does it have to accomplish for it to be worth it? Because lying almost universally has consequences. Now, we've given an example where I think there's almost no bad consequence. I think lying to the Nazis is always okay. Like, I mean, like in that situation.
Not okay. It's not okay. But you would do it.
Well, I'm talking about from a utilitarian perspective. Yes. I don't think there are any bad outcomes to lying to the Nazis. Like, regardless of how it turns out for you, you like, let's say if your lie is successful, you will have not lost the faith of anyone who means anything, because that's kind of the cost of truth. I think a great example of this was in Argo, which is a fantastic movie, but they did this really great thing where they all, just to spoil the entire movie, there are Americans trapped in Iran after the overthrow of Ayatollah. Ayatollah? Is that correct?
Not sure.
Either Ayatollah gets overthrown or takes over. But basically, they overthrow their ruler. We have some people in our embassy. It's sad because I just watched this movie like on Sunday. And they're basically threatening to kill the diplomats. The diplomats escape. They go and live with the Canadian Prime Minister, and then we make I want to say the CIA made basically a con to go in there as movie makers to extract these people. Now, the short-term effects and most of the long-term effects were fantastic for this. But once this story comes out saying, hey, look at this great thing the CIA did, it kind of confirmed a predisposition of in my opinion, the predisposition of the international community to not trust America. Even if it's subtle, and like I said, it might be worth it. I think it is worth it in this case. But there is still a cost.
Yeah.
To us having lied and saved these people's lives, because it just gives an example to the entire international community that America is capable of espionage on some level.
And that's why I think Kantian ethics works so well, is because there is always a cost to breaking that moral code and lying. And it's easy it's easy sometimes to take a quick cursory glance at utilitarianism and say, well, but it was for the greater good, therefore it was okay. The problem with that is that you have to do a certain kind of calculation.
Mm-hmm.
You calculate the greater good, and is that even really possible? I mean, we might get lucky. We might take a lucky guess and say, well, it ended up right, therefore we did the right thing. But that's called hindsight bias. That's like when you get an answer right on the test, and you were like, oh, I knew it all along. Well, maybe you didn't, but it turned out okay, so you feel like you knew it all along.
C was a great choice.
C was a great choice.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if I tell you that there's 7 men here in this room, and if you don't kill one of them, I'm going to kill all 7 of them. Well, you might take a utilitarianist perspective and say, well, it sucks, but clearly I'm going to kill that one person to save. It is better to save 6 lives than to lose 7. So I'm going to do that. But the thing is, you don't know the value of life, and you can't possibly calculate what that means or what's going to happen to that one person. There's no way.
It assumes inevitability as well.
Exactly.
I mean, it assumes that, I mean, given the person may not be lying, they're actually going to kill the 7 people, but someone could stop them before they do.
Sure. And let's say you do kill one person, but that one person was going to end up becoming like a really influential doctor and create a cure for a disease that has plagued the world.
Well, let's say you kill that one person, and then the person who promised to not kill the other 6 goes ahead and kills the other 6.
And kills them. Or the other 6 become dictators of their respective nations. You can't know what the consequences, what the cost of these moral decisions is going to be.
Well, and especially lying. I mean, I think and it's a criticism of the movie Dark Knight Rises, going from Dark Knight into Dark Knight Rises. And then these are all fictional kind of explorations into this idea of lying. But at the end of Dark Knight Rises, they pin the entire everything that Two-Face did on Batman in order to save the image of Harvey Dent. And they do that so that they can basically bring down the criminals. Well, flash forward to the future, and this lie, which by all accounts, in the last, I forget how long in the future, has, accomplished a lot of good. It's taken a lot of bad people off the streets. Well, the lie comes to light. People find out that they were lied to, and now basically everyone's going to be released and then we're going to undo all the good that was done in the past. I think that this example happens more often than the example of the lie going through unscathed. I think a great example is when we teach children abstinence only education.
It's in a way lying to them because we're excluding the truth that there are other options out there besides just abstinence.
And then this is where we get into the ethical responsibility and whether or not it's a lie and whether or not it's just neglect of responsibility. And I think that as a general rule that we do more of the neglect of responsibility than the lying. And maybe not in the abstinence. Maybe that was, intentional misleading, intentional false statements. But
sometimes there's implicit lies, right? Sometimes, like in an abstinence only curriculum, there is often an implicit lie there, which is that either you choose abstinence or you will get pregnant, or you will get an STD, or the consequences will be dire in some way. And even if that's not necessarily explicit, a lot of times that lie exists kind of as an implicit premise. So I think that's equally as immoral or unethical.
Right. I agree. And what the thing is, abstinence only education, the results of this implicit lie is that people have unprotected sex. And
people get pregnant anyway.
They get pregnant and they get STDs. because they don't know anything about contraception. They don't know.
Teenagers have babies that they can't take care of. They seek abortions, right? Because in really back channel scary ways.
And so I agree with you on I agree with Kant, and I agree with you with Kant, because it is more important to give people all the knowledge and allow them to decide for themselves than to try to make a decision for them by withholding the information. Another great one for that is drugs, in my opinion. I grew up when DARE was rampant.
Drug abuse resistance education.
I think I can use the word rampant here because I feel like it wasn't a positive thing. It still exists. It is less funded, and but the kind of the message, and we should have watched. There's a great video of kind of how I mean, I may not be viewing DARE correctly, but in my mind is that DARE was the seminal like ad that represents DARE in my mind is one about the egg and the pan. Hold on, I'll actually bring this one up because it's pretty fantastic. This is Your Brain on Drugs. Yeah. Oh, here we go.
This is your brain. And this is heroin. This is what happens to your brain after snorting heroin. And this is what your body goes through. Wait, it's not over yet. This is what your family goes through. And your friends and your mind. And your job and your self-respect and your future.
Now she explicitly lists heroin as the drug of choice here. There is an earlier version of this where it's just literally an egg. You have a pan with some butter in the middle of it, and they say this is drugs, and then they say this is your brain, and then they break the egg and the egg drops into the middle of the pan, and they say this is your brain on drugs as the egg cooks. And now I feel like that message was universal, that all drugs are bad, drugs are horrible, and
all drugs will fry and destroy your brain.
All drugs, just period.
Drugs.
Anything that we deem as a drug will ruin your brain. And I mean, now that my opinion, this can come back to truth and not truth, but my opinion was that failed miserably. Growing up, I saw the DARE educated children see their friends smoke marijuana and realize, hey, marijuana's not that bad because it's not doing anything to anybody.
My brain's not cooking.
The brain's not cooking. But by virtue of that, you can then apply that message in your brain to all the other drugs. Because you've lied to them and said all drugs are bad. Are most drugs bad?
Right.
Absolutely. A lot of drugs do exactly what was in that video to your brain. Heroin, meth, meth. I mean, there's like the meth. Why can't I think? You can see it. Oh, you can see how much drugs I've done.
Yeah, I'm not an expert. Crack, cocaine, I don't know.
But heroin and meth are awful drugs. They do tear your body apart and your mind. You get horribly addicted.
But if you don't give people all of the facts, then yeah, I can totally see how kids are going to think, oh, well, hey, this drug's not that bad. I bet those other drugs aren't that bad too.
Well, yeah, you've just ruined the faith that they had in that police officer who came in and gave this DARE education. So now we have a little bit of less trust in the police, and then we have less trust in the message of drugs are bad as well. And that was my kind of feeling, but it actually pans out. I don't know if that's the exact psychology of what happened, But it does pan out that DARE failed, that DARE educated children were more likely to try drugs than than people who are not educated by DARE. And DARE funding has
piqued
since
their interest,
failed.
but not given them a bunch of information.
Yep,
You've given them enough information to make them curious, but not enough to actually give them the facts.
right. And my personal opinion is that it was because only partial truths were given to those people. I think that if you present this as heroin and meth will destroy your life, marijuana and alcohol, have the alcohol has the potential if you get addicted and you become an alcoholic. Marijuana has all of these different side effects. It's because people now think marijuana does nothing to you. That's not true either. It's not heroin, it's not meth, but it does have some negative effects on your body. You're smoking something, you're breathing it into your lungs. There are most likely carcinogens, and before it became legal, you weren't guaranteed that it was actually clean marijuana in the first place. And I think it's an excellent example of kind of the lack of the neglect to the ethical responsibility for the people, I guess, kind of people in positions of power, and how if giving people the truth, the full truth, regardless of what they do with it, will pan out better than trying to push them in a specific direction through lies.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, especially from a position of power or authority, I think that epistemic responsibility is increased tenfold if you're in a position where people are going to trust you. Well, Sam, we're kind of burning the midnight oil on this conversation. Should we kind of where do we want to move this along to? We've got you might have guessed there's just simply too much to say today. So we can't say it all.
Agreed. We think we've covered the value of truth pretty well. Or
we touched on cost of truth a little bit as well, talking about that there is always some kind of consequence to telling the truth or not telling the truth.
Yeah, kind of don't think the cost of truth as we were planning on kind of breaking down, and maybe we make this kind of a two-parter. We'll do cost of truth next week. Kind of how we were in the way we were planning on breaking down cost.
That's a good idea, yeah, because I'd like to be able to get into this a little bit more yet, but time is a factor.
Exactly.
We'll be able to do it more justice next time.
Yeah, so we'll kind of we can close.
So we've laid a lot of hay. Let's bale some of it up a little bit. We've talked about knowledge. What is knowledge, right? It is a justified true belief. We've talked about lying. Lying is inherently telling a falsehood, or intentionally telling a falsehood to deceive, right? And then we've kind of touched on this in today's kind of the media climate. What is the ethical, what is the epistemic responsibility that people in positions of authority, namely the media, have towards the world? And where does our justification lie in believing something versus not believing something, and what constitutes adequate justification? I said we'd be asking more questions than we answered, and I think we've been
delivered,
faithful to that goal. But these are interesting questions that don't have easy answers, honestly.
I mean, at the end of the day, the most important thing for all of this is our own personal justification and being honest with ourselves.
And holding ourselves to a high standard of intellectual responsibility.
And a high level of responsibility and high level of justification. That we truly vet, the information that we bring into our lives, and that we propagate. That we, I feel like as a parent, I have a very high level of responsibility on how I raise my children and how I teach them, and that the knowledge that I give them, I have fully vetted so that they can trust me as an authority figure. And to be honest, we kind of have that with our friends, not just our children, but our friends. When you post something on Facebook, you have the responsibility to not have posted just complete dog shit. Like you shouldn't see an article posted by who's my favorite media personality?
John Oliver?
No. I love John Oliver. No. Sarcastically favorite.
Stephen Colbert?
No, the big head, right wing nut job.
Oh, Alex Jones.
Alex Jones. There we
Woohoo!
are. Yeah. What's his website?
Infowars.
Infowars. Golly. So yeah, you can't just see something posted by Infowars, and be like, that's 100%. That's sensational. It's crazy. I'm gonna post it. Like, you have a responsibility to read it. If you read Infowars, which I do not. But if you're that type of person that you find that's entertaining, it is kind of that. It's sort of like a soap opera. It's the tabloids.
Yeah. It's entertaining. It's sensational. It's fun. It's edgy. It's controversial, but it's not really.
But if you're gonna read it, think before you post,
or at least do a quick Google search. I mean, Snopes is right there.
And they're not turning the frogs gay. Like, if something is sensational, where did I put this? It must have been down in the Cost of Truth. If something is sensational, it might be true. There is a possibility of it. There's some pretty crazy shit that's gone on.
Watergate was pretty sensational.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of the stuff that's happening with it currently within this administration is pretty sensational. But
we have, and that's okay. It can be.
It can be.
But as long as our judgment is not being clouded by the emotion of sensation versus reason. We have to lead with reason, and things can be sensational. That's fine, but that can't be our guiding principle in determining the justification for knowledge. It has to be reason and rationality.
I mean, heck, the moon, when we landed on the moon, that was sensational. That's amazing. But there's a lot of evidence backing that up. There's tons of scientific evidence a wealth of evidence that happened. And we have to hold ourselves, that justification, as we were talking about earlier, that's the most important thing. That we vet our sources, that we think, we assess things with reason and rationality, and determine whether or not something is true. And if you do that, and you think at the end of the day, yeah, this is true, all the evidence I see points through, and you share it, and it ends up to be false, you can feel a little bit absolved. I mean, clearly your judgment may have been off a little bit, and try to
better luck next time.
Yeah, try to see how you went wrong, but you've at least done your kind of duty.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the most important thing that we can do, especially in this day and age of social media and untruth.
That said, don't take our word for this podcast. If any of these topics have interested you or piqued your interest in any kind of way, go do some research for yourself. Don't take our word for it. We're probably wrong about like 80% of the stuff we talk about. I don't know. we try to be right. We try to do our duty, but
I do hope we're not at 80%.
I hope so too. I don't think that we are, but
I mean,
prove us wrong. Somebody, I don't know. Somebody prove us wrong.
Yeah, I mean, especially with, philosophy's there's a lot of weeds.
Yeah.
It's a deep field, and we're not perfect. We're not experts by any means. So do your research, learn about Kantian ethics, learn about utilitarianism, and if you think we got something wrong, let us know.
Yeah. And we'll be excited to hear it and adapt our model of knowledge.
Absolutely. I mean, that's that's the best part about life is learning something new. But I think that's about all the time we have for today.
That's it.
If you want to find us, we are on Apple Podcasts, we are on Stitcher, we are on YouTube, we are on Spotify. Please follow, like, subscribe, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. If you want to catch us live, we are live 8:30 every Tuesday, 8:30 Eastern Time every Tuesday on twitch.tv/HectorMeow. And come, if you have something to say it live. We'd love to talk with you. And give us a follow on Twitch, and so you'll know when we come online. You'll get that reminder. But thank you, and we'll catch you next time.
Peace out, everyone.